And as I think about kind of an all-up view of a lot of the shifts that are going on, this is kind of the slide that we created. And interestingly enough, Greg had a very similar slide using slightly different words. But we're seeing the shift in how companies organize from an individual unit to a much more collective view. Organizations move from closed hierarchies to open networks, and the task coordination is increasingly moving from top-down to bottom-up. Knowledge transfer used to be very linear. Increasingly, it's a very dynamic participation of people and teams coming together. And the reason why people go to the work is not just to collect a salary. Oftentimes, it's about a lifelong journey of learning. They're looking for meaning in their work lives. And it's moving from a desk to being able to move and work from anywhere. That all sounds wonderful, but we think there is a but. There are side effects. And I would argue today we live in a world where it is increasingly overwhelming to cope with a lot of the change and the technology and the complexity of it all. So one very simple way to illustrate this is by looking at these two graphs. The red one being the famous exponential growth curve of technology. So you've heard of Moore's law, where you double the transistors on a chip every 18 months. That will be continuing probably for at least another decade. So we will get more powerful systems that can do more things faster, yet they will be cheaper. Storage is plummeting. So we see a lot of exponential growth in the way we communicate and connect. All that is growing exponentially. But if you think about your human capabilities, not quite on the same growth curve, right? I mean, I cannot read any faster today than I could 10 years ago. I cannot manage more relationships in a meaningful way today than I could 10 years ago. Probably a lot less, actually. So we see a lot of tension and anxiety and sometimes frustration that people express to us about all that technology out there. And we need to do a better job aligning how technology actually supports our lives. And that's what we're trying to do in my team. So just to support the earlier point, by the time it took this image to come up, about 300 million emails have been sent around the world. That roughly translates to 200 per person. And I bet many of you get about 200 emails a day. And that is about 11 emails interruptions an hour. Now, this has a side effect on how people function at work. It's about the equivalent of smoking a joint. Your IQ drops by about 15 points if you're a man. A little less so for women, because I think they're better in multitasking. But overall, it's not a pretty picture. And there have been studies that show that people who constantly check their email and their inbox are actually less collaborative at work, and they're justified in just working in their inbox. And people that do not do email all the time, but they do it in batches, maybe once in the morning and once in the afternoon, are much more productive and happier at work. And you know, we are guilty as charged as Microsoft, because I'm assuming a lot of you use Microsoft email products. So what can we do to make that a better experience? And at the same time, we've heard already, the office environment is not working. There's a lot of vacancy. Real estate people are responding by shrinking the space per person. But that's not really the answer, because increasingly we work in diverse and distributed teams. And I've seen a lot of co-working spaces over the last few years, and I talk to people who go there and ask them why. And the one key takeaway for me is it's because of the sense of community these people can experience in these co-working environments. Yes, many come from small startups, but increasingly we see people coming from large companies, mid-sized companies, also preferring to work like this. So having a community of like-minded people that you can run into, share ideas with, that's how people want to work. So for us, to sum it up, we think about the future of work as new ways of being together and doing things together. And that requires new tools, new infrastructures. So I want to give you a few examples. Today's work and if you study how a lot of us that work on projects do work, is a very fluid way of moving from informal activities to formal activities. Yet a lot of the tools we use today are very rich, more formalized tools that are not very good kind of going over the whole spectrum. A lot of the tools are designed to support outputs, document-centric, rather than activities of people. And for us, as we kind of think of this all up, really what we think is important is to focus on the people. And we want to make work more human by finding ways to bring people together, to let them collaborate and be innovative and share things, co-author content. We want them to do this in new and smarter ways. So when we say enhancing our intuition, we think about investments in machine learning, smart platforms, data visualization tools that allow us to really cut through all the noise and just get the relevant data and information that we need. And we want to do this in a way that is optimized for how we want to work. You know, sometimes when you're in this zone of productivity and you just, you can work on something and you're not getting distracted, and that's the way you can do your best work. But it's hard in today's environment, as I've shown you earlier, with all these interruptions. So let's take a look at how this might look like in maybe 3, 5, 7 years. So I'm going to share with you 3 scenarios that my team designed. And it comes with a user experience, with tools and prototypes that hopefully help you manage the shift that we talked about earlier. The first one is about how I could do work on my own with a new infrastructure and a platform. So what you're seeing here is a prototype that we built that's essentially, it looks like a drafting table, but it is a computer. It's touch-enabled. You can access your content in very simple ways, and just the content that you need to access without having to open up a number of different applications. Very little Chrome, like menus. You can interact with content directly. You can use various input mechanisms like voice, touch, or inking. It's very simple to share content across devices. And all these technologies have been invented. They're working today. But in many ways, what's lacking is a common standard that companies can design for so that you can securely share content across these devices. But that will happen. It's a low-hanging fruit. So here are a few of these design prototypes that I brought along from my team. Some of those are going to look very different once we get to the point where these technologies will be made broadly available. Here's a little motion study of how this might look and feel like when you share content from one device to another. And you notice it's not just about taking the same image and moving it over. Because you have a larger real estate on the bigger screen, you can actually now present content in different ways. So in my team, we have a few designers, and they think a lot about designing for different interfaces and form factors. And when you have a display that's this size, it shouldn't look exactly the same that you have on your smartphone. You should be thinking about a different layout, information hierarchy. So imagine you can interact with content in very intuitive, natural ways. So here, I'm just touching a display, and I'm having a conversation with a digital assistant, and I can ask for help. And instead of having to navigate a whole list of commands, I just talk to the system. And there are contextual tools that are made available that are smart because they know what I'm doing in that moment. And I'm only going to see the options that are relevant for me at that point in time and nothing else. So here's another little motion study from my designers that thought about how this could look and feel like. And you see it's very fluid, it's very fast, responsive. And what if the interaction comes with me and is on my body, and as I touch a piece of content, there's a bunch of different things I can now do. I could share it, maybe I can rewind it, Or here's a concept that we think is very interesting. We call it magnetize. So what if you can touch any piece of content, you magnetize it, and what you're doing essentially is unearthing, revealing like-minded content, because the system has been continuously searching on this piece of content in the background, in the context of the work that you're doing and the people that you work with. And now it's giving you results. And these results are things that you might not have even known to search for. But now you're presented with a bunch of options, other content types that could help you get up to speed on a topic that you might not be an expert on. It could also help you connect with other experts and people. And so this is a little bit how technology can support this serendipity in the workplace. And so I want to show you how this might look like. These displays, by the way, while they're expensive today, the prices are coming down so much. So this is in the Envisioning Center, an 82-inch perceptive pixel display. 2 years ago, when we were interested in buying the company, the price was about $80,000. Today, it's about $20,000. And in about 6 to 9 months, it's going to be about half that. So you see kind of the trajectory of the cost curve. So we think it's very feasible to have a lot of large displays in office environment to support how people work. And a few years ago, we created a video to help people visualize. And this is about 2 kids, school kids, connecting that are in different countries. One is in India, the other one in Sydney, Australia. And these kids can talk to each other. And there's not just a real-time translation engine helping them, but there's also a very nuanced way of understanding each other that takes into consideration cultural references. Because when you talk to somebody in India about pets, cats, there might be a different meaning associated with that. So we're now today at the point where we can do real-time voice-to-voice translation. We've shown demos where someone is talking at Microsoft Research to an audience in China. The system is listening in, translating that in real time, modeling it on the voice of the speaker, and then talking in Mandarin. Think about what can happen when you can talk to anybody in the world, and you can look at people in a display that's life-sized, and you can maybe work on a blueprint of a building, and you can pick that apart, and you can talk about the layout of the floor plan while you're communicating. That is very powerful. So the aspiration for this scenario was, how can you have a remote collaboration that's actually better than a face-to-face meeting? Today, very hard to do, but we think it's possible in the future to create these kinds of scenarios. So I'm just quickly going through some of these ideas. And then the final scenario I want to share with you is about a team being super productive in a work environment. And so we're looking at, this is a wall-sized display that's smart, that understands presence, that knows who's in the audience. And what it allows people to do is to really get the relevant information in a meeting, to understand the impact of things in a project, maybe run a simulation, make a decision, and move on. So the bar for us, the aspiration was, how can you design a meeting and support it with smart technology that actually helps people to come in and leave with a shorter action item list, to-do list. Today, that doesn't really happen. And when you ask people what blocks you from being productive, oftentimes it's, I'm in too many meetings and nothing gets done. And then I go to work, and this is where the real work happens. So what if you can walk to this large display and you get a presentation of your project that allows you to go from a macro view to a very detailed view very quickly. It allows you to understand what are the issues. Remote participants can be part of this journey. And you can do real-time simulations that allow you to really see what is happening across the spectrum. The tools we use today do not support this. And they're very siloed, and they're not connected to your back-end processes. This is an example of how the system might give you a real-time infographic or data visualization to really support the decision-making process and make it faster. We think this is very powerful, because it allows the best people on the team to get the information they need and the team to come together and make decisions. So those were just three scenarios. There's a lot more going on at work, but in the time I had this morning, I wanted to share these. There are a lot more things happening, and if you ever get to Seattle, it would be my pleasure to host you in the Envisioning Center. It's a facility my team designed to illustrate some of these ideas. And so I have a few pictures for you that I wanted to share. So this is the prototype I showed you earlier with a large display. And so we have a whole story around this that really helps people understand the possibilities when these technologies are finally in our hands. And by the way, these displays you can buy today. This is a design of, we call it the collaborative corner, where you can just do an informal meeting, maybe it's a brainstorm with your team, but you have all the tools you need to support this. We have a space just like this in the building I work at in Microsoft in Redmond. And it was designed by Primo from O&A Studios, who has been a speaker here in this conference. And one of the things I love about their work is this notion of the different archetypes of spaces that support people. And we use this type of a setting all the time in my team. And we can have this be a space that grows with a project. So other than if you compare that to being in a conference room where you leave and you have to clean everything up and wipe the whiteboard with your notes, this is really powerful. It helps us have this permanent project space. So I want to say thank you very much. I don't know if there are time for questions, but I'll be here throughout the day and happy to connect with you. But if you do have a question, happy to answer them. Okay. Is there a question?
Gracias. Tengo una pregunta para Harald. Hola, hola. ¿Se escucha?
Is it on?
Hola. Sí.
Yes, I can.
En realidad son dos preguntas que tengo. La primera es si las organizaciones pueden evolucionar o pueden adaptarse a la velocidad que los cambios en la tecnología están trayendo al mundo de los negocios. Da la sensación que no, pero quería conocer tu impresión. Y la segunda pregunta es si todo este potencial que nos trae la tecnología en el futuro va a hacer que las empresas con acceso a estas tecnologías, que son en general empresas, grandes corporaciones y en general establecidas en países desarrollados, van a aumentar aún más la diferencia con empresas de países subdesarrollados o en vías de desarrollo, o al revés, o la tecnología lo que va a hacer es potenciar a las organizaciones que no están en los grandes centros económicos.
Yes. I think I take those headphones off for the answer. Excellent questions, thank you. I think to answer your first question, there is a very big challenge for a lot of organizations to keep up with the speed of change and technology. And I talk to hundreds of customers every year, and I hear a lot of complaints like, we cannot keep up with the continuous influx of new tools and services and technologies, and we're still working on maybe XP and Office 2003, and yet you keep releasing things and releasing things. And I think the answer is that technology companies need to get better at understanding how organizations work, and they need to make it a lot simpler for companies to adopt and embrace these technologies. Today, it comes with a high cost. There's a lot of complexity, And I think at Microsoft, we're getting better at understanding how we can provide access to new tools and services in ways that are not disruptive, that are not expensive for companies. Let me give you one example. We now have a cloud service called Office 365 that allows you to use what used to be a standalone application that you deployed locally on your computer or on your server, and you access that now through the cloud, and there's no complexity in terms of getting access to these services. That's a very different model, and it makes it a lot easier for companies to continuously be on the leading edge of these tools. So I think that will help ease the tension. And to your second question, my hope is that increasingly there will be more access to these technologies for everybody, whether you're in the emerging world or developed economies. And the reason why I'm optimistic about this is that increasingly access to these services, capital, and other resources becomes easier. You can now start a company with as little as $10,000, $20,000, or if you don't have any money, you can tap into some of these new mechanisms like crowdfunding. And then you can go to Amazon or to Microsoft or Google, and you can get cloud services, amazing, powerful capabilities that cost very little. I remember early in my career, I worked at Sun Microsystems. In those days, if you were a startup, you needed about $20 million to get off the ground. You had to buy a Sun Starfire server, a box that was this size, and it cost about $1 million. Those days are over, and so I hope that access to technology is going to get easier and cheaper. All right, well, thank you very much for your time.